Welcome to Amberg Acres, folks. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about how I make my dimensional lumber. Now the project I'm working on right now is the floor on top of those two rooms. One room is going to be storage, a floor just to put storage up there, and the other room is actually going to be my office. And I may put another type of flooring, like laminate flooring or something, over the top of this stuff later on. But for right now, I just need to get a floor up there so I can work on the second room on top. So yesterday I went and cut up 6 cants, okay, out of those red pine logs that I got last year. And the way I do this, and this I'm sharing this with you to help for some of you that may be struggling making good dimensional lumber. So I start out with one of my resharp blades. So I basically square up a cant, and I have in my head the dimension that I need. So right now I'm making 1x6 and 2x6 lumber, okay? So I square this log up widthwise. So if I put the tape measure on there, that should measure right around 6.5 inches, maybe 6 3/8, you know, it all depends. So that's my first 2 cuts. And if I can get another inch out of the log, say the bigger logs, I can get another inch on both sides off of there, then I'll make some slab wood. And the slab wood will get used later on for signs or whatever we intend to use it for. I can cut it up into 1x4s for trim or whatever. But I set that stuff aside, and it's just laying there as a slab right now. So I got my 6 inches, okay? Then I flip the log up on end, the highway, and I just take off to clean it up so that I get most of the wane off of there. And if there's a little bit of wane, no big deal, because I'm taking a skim cut before I start doing my dimensional lumber. So each log is going to give you a different dimension that way. This one here on top is probably more like 8 inches. It was a bigger log. The ones below it are more like 6 inches only. Okay, and it all depends on the log you're using. That's what's going to give you your length there. So now what I do is I'm going to put this back up on a saw, and I'm going to lay it down the flat way. I'm going to lay it down with that side up. I'm going to take a skim cut on both sides. So I'll take a skim cut, flip it over, and cut it to my 5.5 inch dimension. And the reason I'm going to 5.5 instead of 6 is because I need this to match up to bought lumber, and bought lumber is at 5.5 inches. So I'm just going to take a skim cut on both sides to get to my 5.5 inches. And what that does is these logs have a tendency to, and it depends, the longer they are, the worse it gets. But they have a tendency to spring, okay? When you cut that chunk off the top on both sides, and then you leave it sit here for a day or two, they will spring. So when I put this back on the sawmill, if I see one that has a big gap, I will show you how much that cant has sprung. That extra 1/2 inch now is helping me get that out of there and getting any wavy lumber that I had using my resharp blade. So now I'm putting a new blade on. That blade should cut really nice square lumber for a while. I should be able to get through all 6 of these cants because I'm not cutting bark. So it should stay sharp, and I should be able to get all my lumber that I want out of these 6 cants. And then when I switch back to logs, I go put a resharp blade back on the saw and square up and go through the same process again. So we're going to put one of these up there, and we're going to get started, and we'll cut lumber. So this particular batch, I'm looking for 1x6s, okay? And then out of the center where the pith is, I'm going to be taking a 2.5x6 or 2.5x5.5 beam for another project that I'm working on. So whatever that gives me, if it gives me 3 boards on top and 3 boards below, that's what I get. So we'll get started here, and I'll go through the process with you as we're doing it. So the first thing I am going to do here is I'm going to lay out my log, my cant. Now I want this dimension to end up at 5.5. If you look at the pith here, it is not perfectly centered, and they end up that way Even though I try and center up the two ends, when I'm first cutting the log, they don't always end up in the middle because the logs are not straight. So it's off a little bit, but it should get encapsulated in that 2.5 inch beam that I want. So what I do is I find the center. So this piece is measuring 6.5, just what I was trying to make it to. So if I go to 3 1/4, that would be my center. So I want this to be 5.5 inches finished size, okay? So that would be 2 3/4 from that center mark. So I put the 2 marks there. I have one at the center, and then I have one at the 2 3/4, and that's going to be my cut right there. And what I'm going to do with this leftover is a 1/2 inch leftover. I'm going to take 2 cuts at 1/4 inch, and I'm going to use that stuff for my laser for just wood for making projects. Okay, so I'm not just necessarily throwing the stuff away. You can use it for all kinds of stuff. That 1/2 inch, I could use that as a piece of siding. If I needed another piece of siding, I could use it for a lot of stuff. But I'm going to try and take 2 cuts so I can get some thinner material for the laser. And I have to stack that and sandwich it so that it stays flat. But that's how I start. So there's my mark. That's where I'm going to line up the blade to. It doesn't have to be perfect, because when you flip it over, you're going to measure from the bottom up to get your 5.5 inches. So this doesn't have to be exact where I line this up at. So now you have a real nice flat surface to start from. So now we're going to flip this over, and we're going to get our 5.5 inch dimension set in stone. So now we got a nice straight surface down here on the bottom. We just put a new blade on. It cut real nice and straight. There's no waves to it. So we're going to mark our 5.5 inches now. Now you could gauge your blade off your bunk and then come up 5.5 inches. You can do it that way and use your scale if you want. But I find that scale is not giving me the same results every time, because you can be 1/8 of an inch on one side of the line or 1/8 of an inch to the other side of the line, depending on how you're looking at it, because you're looking from down and up. So when you're higher up, you're looking way up at it. When you're farther down, you're looking right at it straight, and it makes a difference in the size of your board. So if you want all your lumber to come out the same, I suggest doing it this way, and then using your crank and figuring out how many turns for an inch board. So I have it written down on a block here. So for a 1 inch board, I do 3.5 turns, and they all come out exactly the same. It's just one of my tips for you. I'm a little light, so I'm going to raise it up a little bit and then start again. And that couple inches will probably get cut off of my board. So now if your bunks and everything are relatively straight, this should measure 5.5 all the way down. Yep. So I am about a 16th of an inch thicker down there than I am on this end. And that is perfectly normal. That is perfectly fine. It's rough sawn lumber. If you go to Menards or Home Depot or wherever you buy your lumber at, you're not going to find it any better there either, and they run it through a planer. So this is perfect lumber right now, the way it is. So I hope you can see this. This is an unforeseen feature you get in your wood. Now these trees came out of a pine plantation on a guy's property. The guy bought the property and he wanted these trees cut down so he could put some campers and stuff in there. So why this metal is in this tree, I have no idea. But this could be a tree that came from right next to the lane. There was a lane where he drives his car back there. So this could be one of the trees that came out right from the lane there, and somebody put a bunch of nails, or maybe this is some wire fencing, that this was, somebody had a fence stapled to the tree. And you can see the wood is damaged here. You know, there was a bad spot in the side of the tree, which sometimes can give you a clue. But I didn't see this until now, and I just ran my good blade over the top of it. So we're gonna nurse the blade through this log, and then we'll put a new blade on before we start the next log. But that's all you can do. I think when I get to the other side here, I will try and take the full cut and get away from this, get underneath it, so I'm not cutting through it. So I'll just be scrapping a piece basically. But that's one of the things you run into in cutting lumber. Well, I guess my plan didn't work. That is loaded up. That blade is junk now. I took an inch off and it's in there good. All right, so now we stood this up on end, and we're gonna take our 1-inch lumber down to, I want a 2.5 inch beam out of the middle, 2.5 by 5.5 out of the middle of this log or cant. So from that center mark, now I'm going to come up 1.25 inches, and that's going to be my start point. Again, this first spot does not have to be perfect, because when we flip it over, we'll be measuring off the bottom. So right there's my start point, and now I'm going to go up in increments of 1 inch. And what I showed you before here, I have it written down on this little block of wood. So for a 1-inch board, I use 3.5 turns. Just gonna get a third one on there. So I'm gonna take a little skim cut now, just to see if I take anything off. So we got lucky on that one. That cleaned up all the way across, just taking that little skim cut like that. So if it wouldn't have cleaned up, because this is your first side, you could drop it another 1/16 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, whatever you want, and take another skim cut so that you're sure you're getting this first side cleaned up nice and square. And now we're gonna come down and we're gonna get 3 1-inch boards out of there on this side. And then we'll flip the log over and we'll do the same thing on the other side again. I'm gonna come down 3.5 turns. And I always go at least a half turn past and then come back so that I'm always on the upstroke before I start my cut. Let's see what we're at. We're at perfectly 1 inch right there. You can't get it much better than that. So there you have 3 beautiful pieces of 1x6 red pine. And this stuff is perfectly straight, all to the same thickness. And when I put it down on the floor, that will make a really nice floor. Basically the subfloor. So I'm gonna clean these up. I gotta get the sawdust off of these, and then we'll flip this log over and start on the other side. So here's my example of how the log springs. You can see that there's a gap there, and you go to the next bunk and it's nice and tight. The middle bunk, nice and tight. That one's nice and tight. Then you get to the end out there and it's a big gap. So that's what I'm talking about, the log, the ends of the log spring. We're gonna take that light cut here now. You know, take that light cut on top, and that should straighten that out for when I flip it over. So now you can see, after cutting that other side, they're all straight, they're all tight. They're all down tight on the bunks now. It's not a lot, but it's going to make your board taper by 1/8 of an inch if you leave that gap in there. So now it's all nice and flat, and it's sitting perfectly flat. So now we're going to measure up from the bottom, our 2.5 inches, so we get our nice beam out of there, and then we'll go up again. Hopefully we can get 3 boards out of this side. So this part here getting started, if you want that beam to be 2.5 inches, I take a little cut on the end, because you're always going to saw that off. You got cracks, whatever, on the end of your board. So you're going to saw that off. So I make my little cut, and then I measure it again to make sure I can get in my 2.5 inches. So this one here, I'm a little light, so I got to go up probably 2 holes, and then I'll do it again, and then I'll measure, and that'll tell me that I am at my 2.5 inches, and that'll be my start point. So now that I have my start point established, now I'm going to go up my inch. So we're not going to get 3 out of that one. We're way above. And that's the way it just works out. So I'll cut that piece at my 1 inch mark. Whatever it is, if it's 3/4 inch or whatever, I'll use it for something else. I won't be able to use it for my floor, but I'll use it for projects, for molding, whatever you can use it for. So that piece ended up at a perfect 3/4 inch. So that's a very nice piece now for molding or trim, or if you want to make bird houses, whatever. So you put this on a different pile, and after you're sawing for a while, you have all kinds of extra lumber, what I call my secondary lumber. So you have all kinds of lumber sitting around that you can make little projects out of, or if you're working on something, you go, boy, I need a piece of 3/4 inch. Well, there you got your piece of 3/4 inch. Well, those are beautiful pieces. So you're probably telling yourself by now that, boy, that seems like a slow process of doing it that way. That's the only way that I am able to get perfectly exactly the same lumber. You watch all these YouTube videos, and I watch them all. I watch all the guys with the woodland mills, sawmills, and whatever, and they're just sitting there ripping through this stuff. I can't see that wood being any good. That's just my opinion, okay? I've been sawing long enough now. I've been sawing for a year, and this is the way I get good lumber. Unless they're changing their blade, putting a brand new blade on every 2 logs, there's no way they're getting good lumber the way they're sawing that stuff. So that's just my opinion. So I want to show you the end of this piece here where I did my first start cut. So you can see right here on the end, there's a little step there. I took my first cut, measured it. I was a little light, so then I came up a little bit, and now I'm at my 2.5. So these beams are going to end up at about 12 feet. So this will get cut off right about here. We'll get off anything nasty, and then we'll have a good 12-foot piece all the way down. So what did we get out of that cant? We got 5 1x6s, 1 inch by exactly an inch. So 4 quarters. They would call that 4 quarters by 5.5 inches. Okay. We got 1 2.5 by 5.5 inches. And we got 1 3/4 by 5.5 inches. And the reason I'm cutting this, and I think I said this before, to the 5.5 is so that they match up the dimensional number that I bought from the store. So anywhere I run into the 6x6 posts, the green treated lumber that I'm using along the floor, it's all going to match up now because I'm at 5.5 inches. So you can cut your lumber to whatever size you want to cut it to, and that's fine. If you know what you're making it for, great. This is how I get my dimensional lumber, and I get nice straight boards for doing a floor, and that's what I'm doing. So I got a lot of wood to cut here. I didn't run the numbers yet at how many 1x4s or 1x6s I need, but I'm going to need a lot of them. So I'm going to be cutting for a few days here. I did 6 cants yesterday. I got 6 more logs laying here, and I got a bunch more across the street over there yet. So I should have plenty to do those 2 floors. And then I would like to use this same stuff inside on the walls or the ceiling, and then drywall the walls maybe. I don't know yet. I won't know until I get there, till I figure out what I'm going to do. But I think that would look nice on the inside too. You know, do a diagonal pattern or whatever. You know, I think it would look really cool in there if you did that on the walls. That's my plan. I'm sticking to it. So we have a bunch of snow coming tonight. So before I cover this all up, I thought I'd show you what I got out of those logs. So I cut 12 logs. So out of each piece, out of each cant, I got either a 2.5 or an 1.5 inches. So there's 12 pieces right there out of each one of those cants. Then I got all them boards on the inside of the barn, which I'll show you in a second. All of those slabs right there, and those little thin pieces that I was making for the laser. So I gotta get that all stacked better, a little better, and put a cover over it for now till I find a spot to move it to. And I gotta get this covered up too. So these here, just for a quick explanation, those are gonna be posts. And the reason I made it a 2.5 and 2 1/2 so they would measure 5.5, just like the beam, the posts that are inside the barn, if that makes sense. Okay, the normal laminated post that you get from Menards is not 5.5, it's 3 1/2 pieces, so it only measures 4.5 inches. So it's an inch narrower than the regular solid post. So I made these a little different. I made these so they're going to match up to the 6x6 posts that are inside the barn. So that's what these are for. So I believe I need 10 of them all together. So I got a lot more cutting to do. Plus I got a whole bunch more one by material to make. So by the time I'm done, I will have enough posts. So let's go inside the barn and I'll show you the other pieces in there. So this is my stack of lumber inside. I calculated it out that I would need 6.5 layers the way I have this stacked. So this is my 6th layer, and I'm a little short, but I have these, I think there's 5 boards there, laying on the floor. Those boards came after I hit the wire. They all have a wavy edge. So I thought I was cutting straight, but when I stacked them on this pile, you can see how nice and tight the edges are. When I stack those on here, they're all wavy on the edges. So I gotta put them back up on the saw and or on the table saw and try and just clean up that edge, and I'll still be able to use them. So that'll give me my sixth roll. So I need a half a roll, which is about 4 or 5 pieces. So over here are a bunch of pieces. Some of them are 3/4, but there's a couple of 1-inch ones in there where that wire was on one end. So I should be able to save the rest of that board, 10 feet or so. So I can use those also. So I think I have enough to do one ceiling. I should have enough to do one ceiling. So I will need to cut another 6.5 rows to do the other ceiling. And then I should have enough boards to do the floors. So if you like these videos, give me a thumbs up, make sure you subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.